Steve Nash, one of the best ever.
There's never been a player like him.
The guy is the most incredible player we've seen ever in the NBA.
Steve Nash was a wizard with the basketball.
He could do a lot of stuff on the court that a normal person couldn't do.
Steve Nash is just phenomenal.
What a magician with the ball.
He might be the most unassuming looking superstar in NBA history.
Canadians should be very proud of Steve Nash. He's one of the great point guards in the history of the game.
There are great guards and there are all-time great guards. Steve Nash would be an all-time great.
Yep, I agree with that.
He didn't come in killing the game, but eventually he took over the game.
He is a Hall of Famer. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer.
All right, let's go. Let's go, guys. Let's go.
Steve Nash, listed at 6'1". He's got a slight build, but his game is big. In fact, some have gone as far as to suggest that Steve Nash is the best high school player this province has ever seen.
I just kind of don't believe it. I mean, look at all those players that have played in the past here. I don't really put myself on the same level as them. I just try to play as well as I can and try to add a dimension to my game every time I play. A lot of focus has been on me this year. I'm not exactly sure why.
Every story, no matter how sweeping, has to start somewhere. And the best stories often have the most unlikely beginnings. There could be almost no place further from where Steve Nash went than where Steve Nash began. Victoria, BC, an unlikely basketball hotbed.
A key step in his development was May 1991. The Canadian senior men's national team was centralized in Victoria, and the coach, Ken Shields, invited Steve to practice with the team.
He was a player that you recognized right away had special talents, and he held his own.
I remember seeing this wiry kid fly down the lane and throw up a left-handed layup, and I said to one of the coaches beside me, "Who's that left-handed kid?" And he looked around and he goes, "There's no left-handed kid out there." And I said, "No, that guy there." And he goes, "Oh, that's Steve Nash. He's in the 10th grade." And I was like, and he's not left-handed. And I was like, okay.
One of the guys who was working for Basketball Canada, Peter Montopoli, was standing watching with me, and I said, "You see that little skinny guy out there?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "He's going to play in the NBA." And he looked at me like I had rocks in my head.
Sometimes fate smiles, even when it's stormy. Nash had a big dream. He wanted to play Division I basketball in the U.S.
The recruiting option of Canadians going to the States was a lot different than it is now. It was just nothing but no, 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 no. He's got a shoebox full, I think, of rejection letters. I just kept saying, all you need is one that says yes.
After being ignored through high school, he finally got on the radar of Santa Clara University, the only D1 program recruiting him. There were no guarantees, but it was a chance, all Nash ever wanted. At a turning point, Nash got the guidance he needed from a friend who put Steve's interests ahead of his own.
I got to know him pretty well because obviously from the 10th grade right through till he graduated from high school, I was recruiting him. When we finally brought him over for his official visit, you know, he hung out with a bunch of our guys, and I talked to him and sold him more on Simon Fraser, and then I was taking him back to the ferry terminal, and the winds had picked up, and there was like a 2-hour delay, and I couldn't leave this recruit sitting at the ferry terminal. So we started chatting. He said, "What would you do if you were in my position?" I said, "I would try to play at the NCAA level, aim at the highest level possible."
I think once he realized that Santa Clara were actively pursuing him and were very interested in him, he wasn't going to let that chance slip by.
Steve is from British Columbia. The assistants told us yesterday they went to check him out. They watched him play for about 10 minutes, and they started looking around the gym going like, "Is anybody else here?"
There's one that slipped through the cracks.
First time I saw Steve play was at Santa Clara, and I was with the Golden State Warriors, and everyone saw what he did as a freshman and those special moments, and being right down the road, you know, he used to come up and play against Timmy Hardaway and Jason Kidd, Gary Payton. I mean, there was kind of a very rich ground for guards, and you could tell he was a pretty special talent.
One of my first broadcasts as a color analyst, I got a chance to do a Santa Clara game, and there was all this talk about Steve Nash, whether he was going to make it to the NBA, and I was like, I don't know whether he's going to make it or not, but I'd like to be the recipient of some of those passes.
He dropped dimes all day long. For the most part, it was too much Steve Nash.
When he first got to Santa Clara, he got to work, sharpening his skills. Nash helped the Broncos to the NCAA tournament as a freshman. By the time Nash was a senior, the unknown from Victoria was one of the best players in the country. And suddenly, the NBA seemed like a reality.
Nash really looks forward to being on a stage like this.
I mean, he took Santa Clara to heights it hadn't seen in a long time and hasn't seen since.
What Steve was always capable of doing is displaying his brilliance for the game, his intelligence about the game, and his IQ is really what kind of stood out. It was just a great opportunity to see this great draft prospect.
Tonight, you've arrived at a place where childhood dreams will come true. With the big city of New York as a backdrop, it is the 1996 NBA Draft.
Leading up to the draft, you're looking at the whole pool of players, and we start to zero in on Steve as a possibility with the 15th pick. Our first intent, to be perfectly honest, was to go after Kobe Bryant. That was the guy we had targeted.
With the 13th pick in the 1996 NBA Draft, the Charlotte Hornets select Kobe Bryant from Lower Merion High School in Pennsylvania.
When the draft occurred and we were not able to secure a pick higher than Charlotte, made things kind of difficult for us, and now you're looking at a different group of players.
We had Kevin Johnson at the time that was getting a little long in the tooth, and the timing was right for us to bring in a young point guard that could learn under him, and it ended up being a pretty good selection.
The Phoenix Suns select Steve Nash from the University of Santa Clara.
Probably caught a lot of flack, for being a little white guy, Canadian kid, not being able to survive in the NBA.
I thought Steve Nash's physical abilities were always underestimated.
He carved and revolutionized the way a point guard plays the game.
It was the true definition of a point guard. He had eyes at the back of his head.
The passes, the shooting, just very, very basketball savant.
Just told himself he's going to do what he does, and the results speak for themselves.
His entire story was inspirational for me.
The Phoenix Suns select Steve Nash from the University of Santa Clara.
I want to thank Santa Clara, St. Michael's High School, Arbutus Junior High, all my coaches, my family, and my friends. They've done a lot for me along the way, and I couldn't have done it without any of them.
It never came easily for him, but he always made the best of whatever situation he found himself in.
Steve Nash.
Being drafted by the Suns was an opportunity. But for 2 seasons, Nash was behind 2 Hall of Fame caliber point guards in Kevin Johnson and Jason Kidd.
Ultimately, unfortunately, led to us trading Steve because although he was playing a lot of minutes, you could even argue starters minutes, with Jason Kidd there for the foreseeable future, it was going to be hard to pay him starters money as a point guard.
When I was in Phoenix, I was on the receiving end of the Jason Kidd trade, which turned Steve from a backup to a third backup behind 2 future All-Stars at the time, and so being a third backup point guard and Steve still finding himself, provided an opportunity for us to, make a draft trade.
We found a couple of scenarios that we thought might work. One of them, I just couldn't get the deal done, but we were trying to trade him to Vancouver, of all places, for a very high draft pick that year. We were rebuffed by Vancouver. I still think if that trade had happened to Vancouver, that team might still be in the league rather than be, playing in Memphis right now. And, at the same time, we had a deal that came up with Dallas.
The 1998 draft was franchise-altering for the Dallas Mavericks. After Don and Donnie Nelson made a pair of trades, Dallas came away with 2 franchise cornerstones in Steve Nash and Dirk Nowitzki.
I think that kind of was a little lucky on draft night when they got both of us at the same time.
First impressions aside, Nash and Nowitzki developed a bond on and off the court that will outlast their careers.
I thought he was a weirdo, with bad hair, but we started hanging out. He took me out a little bit, and I could just see, this is a guy that's going to help me out a lot, not only on the court, but off the court. And so I ended up taking an apartment in the same apartment complex where he was living. And that ended up, for me, being the best thing ever. I was a little homesick every now and then, miss Germany, miss my family, but he was always, he called me, hey, come meet my friends. My crazy Canadian friends are in town. They want to take you out. I appreciated him a lot for what he did for me early, and for a long, long time, he was my best friend.
Nash finally had his own team and a contract that set him up financially for life. But he was playing in pain, and for the first time in his career, struggling with his confidence.
Steve had some back problems, and then Nelly obviously gave him the extension, gave him a nice contract. And that's all his fans really saw, that he's making a good amount of money, and he's just not producing as much as we want.
Like so many times in his journey, it was one step forward, 2 steps back. Except this time, it came with a diss track and a chorus of 20,000 singing the same song.
Every time he touched the ball in his home jersey in Dallas, he was getting booed, and it really bothered him a lot.
It was tougher as a friend than as a teammate, because I know the injuries that he was trying to play through. I just felt bad when the crowd was booing him, because they didn't know the whole story. They just saw a guy come from Phoenix, get a lot of money, and who wasn't producing to what his contract was saying.
There was a lot of frustrations, I think, on both sides. But, you know, sometimes you have to go to rock bottom, you know, to push through and believe in yourself.
I just knew that that day would come when those same fans that was booing him would be cheering for him.
Nash began to settle in. He solved his injury issues and forged a connection with Nowitzki and Finley that helped the Mavericks become one of the best offensive teams in the NBA. By his 3rd season in Dallas, they won 53 games and their first playoff series. Nowitzki became an all-star, and his point guard was the engine driving it all.
You had a great point guard, you had a big man who was transferring the game, and you had a throw-in like myself. Although we came up short on that ultimate goal, I always thought that if that team was together for an extended period of time, that we would at least have one championship in Dallas.
I always think sometimes what could have been if Steve would have stayed here. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that way.
Even as an all-star, driving the league's best offense, there were still doubters, and the Mavericks opted to let Nash hit free agency.
I thought Steve would be a perfect fit for us because we needed a point guard. And so we traveled to Dallas to meet with Steve. And at the time, I think Mark Cuban was flirting with signing Shaq or re-signing Steve. And we were like, man, if we can just kind of get Steve now while Dallas is uncertain, it'd be the perfect situation for us.
It gave us confidence to step into free agency that year and put ultimately $66 million on the table.
One thing led to another, and we ended up signing Steve, and I was super excited.
You know, I left here somewhat begrudgingly, only because I love the organization and the city. And to be able to come back under these circumstances is just fantastic, and I think it's a perfect circle for me.
I didn't know how great Steve was until he got to Phoenix. And then when I realized, like, this guy's the real deal.
Pretty stuff. Steve Nash behind the back. Nash picks up a dime.
The creativity of Steve Nash is just mind-boggling.
Not only has a great imagination, but the ability to pull it off.
Steve Nash is just phenomenal.
What a magician with the ball. It just exploded, and Steve was perfect. And perfect timing, and we had perfect teammates around him, so it was the best of all worlds.
Nobody ever envisioned Nash as an MVP-type player until he and Mike D'Antoni got together in Phoenix.
We totally revolutionized the game. We created this offense called 7 seconds or less.
Before the Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Warriors, the template for that really was the 7 seconds or less Phoenix Suns.
D'Antoni was all about pace, pushing the ball on the court, getting a shot in 7 seconds or less, constantly applying offensive pressure. His whole objective was to completely wear you down.
By the time we got into the third quarter, teams was like tired. We were going timeout. Hey, Steve, look over there, man. The whole team is grabbing their knees, bro. They're tired. Let's keep going.
Nash makes everybody look better. That's what you're supposed to do. Steve Nash, one of the best ever at doing just that.
Steve Nash was a true floor leader.
He was the prototypical point guard that made other people better.
At the time that he did it in Phoenix, there was only one guard that existed that could pull that off, and it was Steve Nash. There was no other guard that could run an offense that was high octane, that was constant aggressive for 82 games plus. That's why Steve Nash was your MVP.
Congratulations, NBA MVP Steve Nash.
He had the perfect fit around him with Coach D'Antoni's system, with the athletes, with Stoudemire rolling, with some of their shooters. It just couldn't have been more perfect for what Steve brought.
He took advantage of whatever the defense gave him. If you back off him, he shoot the jumper. If you're up close and tight, he's gonna go around and make the play. If you help off this guy from the corner, he's gonna make the correct pass. And the pass is gonna be right on the dime. You know, those fundamental skills, point guards have to somewhat re-embody because it allows players to really become better players. And it allows your team to become great.
There are great guards and there are all-time great guards. Steve Nash would be an all-time great.
Yep, I agree with that.
When he was playing here, I would have never thought he can be a back-to-back MVP. But like I said, he was phenomenal there, and I was happy for him and proud of him.
Nash is just amazing. You know, every night he'd come out there and he'd just come at you. It was tough playing against Steve Nash, just a magician with the ball.
His God-given talent is enormous.
No one existed in the game that could do what he did night in and night out.
I would have paid to have stayed and played with Steve Nash. I've loved watching Steve Nash play.
It was fun to watch him play. Not always when I was on the other side, but it was fun watching.
While his NBA career was unfolding, his enthusiasm for his country, for his flag, never diminished. Maybe it was growing up in a soccer household or a hockey nation, but for him, playing his sport while wearing Canada's colors was always the ultimate expression of his passion.
Representing my country was the proudest and most emotional moment of my career.
A vision shared almost a decade earlier, while passing time in a ferry terminal, finally came true at the 2000 Olympics in Sydney.
We were marching into the opening ceremonies. We had our arms around each other and we said we both wanted to do this. This is crazy. It came true. And it's just one of those special moments where you have two guys that have big dreams and you talk about them and you share them and then they both come true.
Nash helped deliver some of Canadian basketball's greatest moments.
He was carrying the nation. I mean, at that Olympics, Canada was kind of struggling in a lot of things and the basketball team was the team that everybody kind of fell in love with, and it was because of Steve.
When you play with Steve, there's a confidence that you have. A part of his greatness is making you better, is making you great. He was always a guy that was able to pull everyone along with him. Everybody wanted to be there with him, had fun playing with him, and always knew you had a chance to win.
Just to see what he did during the time where he went to the Olympics and how it affected the country, you know, that's the reason I started to play, and that's the reason I love playing for Team Canada so much, you know, today.
I've been trying to visualize that and imagine that feeling of having Canada across your chest and in the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. I think that's one of like the original motivating factors I had to even play basketball.
As he pursued his goals, knocking down barriers and reaching new heights, he became, in the eyes of many, less a basketball player and more a symbol. Proof of what's possible, a license to dream big dreams, and slowly but surely, a nation of ballers followed his example.
He's come into our national team camps and talked to the players that there's still nothing better than being able to wear Canada across my chest and playing in the Olympic Games. It was one of his highlights. And I think that when you say that to this generation of players, they start to think, wow, that's pretty cool. That's something I want to do.
He's like the godfather of Canadian basketball. And then, you know, he gives back, you know, to Canadian basketball and you know, helps us out and tries to make us, you know, just intelligent as him.
He's done a great job of being an ambassador for our country and for the game at large. Obviously, he's involved in all different levels as far as development from grassroots to some of the best pros in the NBA, so he obviously knows the game, and the fact that he's also representing our country means a lot. So I think it motivates a lot of guys.
For myself and for a lot of kids growing up in Canada, it kept our dreams alive. That we could make it to the NBA and we could do great things. Playing the game of basketball.
He was very proud of being Canadian, and rightfully so. And I'm glad his work he's doing with the national team, and he's a symbol of Canada and all is right with sports.
Coming from nowhere, Nash is suddenly everywhere. His vision has helped shape the NBA, creating a blueprint for a style of play that the best in the world have been inspired by and is still shaping the sport. The kid from Victoria shot for the stars and he reached them. A Canadian, James Naismith, invented the game, and a Canadian, Steve Nash, will enter the Hall of Fame for playing it better than any Canadian ever has. The kid no one knew about will never be forgotten.
I think for a little kid growing up playing soccer and ice hockey, I think that is an unbelievable achievement. Honestly, he's just a good dude that worked hard and made it.
To go on and be able to coach Steve and know him as a friend and coach him in an Olympics, and now to sit back and watch him get inducted in the National Basketball Hall of Fame. It's just a phenomenal feat for a Canadian.
It's a story that not only I think is inspiring to Canadian youth, but to a young kid all over the world who's trying to figure out how to make it in anything.
Being from Canada and representing a country and playing basketball at a high level and being somewhat of a positive ambassador for Canada, it was captivating for me. So to see him going into the Hall of Fame is very, very well deserved.
It was that work ethic and it was that focus and that attention to detail that allowed this young Canadian player that probably had no shot at making the NBA, that was under-recruited in college, that was looked over to some degree in the draft, that ultimately, hit the pros in a way that you wouldn't have anticipated any of this, but it was what he did from that point forward that put him at that MVP level status, that put him at that Hall of Fame status. It didn't happen by accident.
I'll say it because I believe it. I think Steve Nash is the best passing point guard that I've seen.
He has some phenomenal years, and it's just a testament to his hard work.
He's giving back to the game as much as he changed the game when he was playing.
I don't have time here to describe Steve and how good Steve Nash was, man. In such a short interview, that's not possible. I need maybe like 2 or 3 days.
He didn't come in killing the game, but eventually he took over the game.